he also read an initial draft of the book. And initially, the nanites were contagious. So basically, humanity was sort of like slowly transitioning into becoming immortal nanite androids. And then he did some like math, and he was like, because of the lily pad effect, do you guys know that? Like, if something doubles every day, then like the entire lake will be covered by lily pads in like, I don't know, 3 days or something. And so it's because of the lily pad effect, like everyone would be a clone on Earth like in 3 days or something. I was like, oh, okay. That's stupid. So I just took out that technology. And then I thank her son in the acknowledgements as well. It's a collaborative effort. It takes a village to write a book.
Yeah, that was so interesting to hear about putting that new chapter in, and how you really like the emotional experience of that. And actually, like, as someone who, you just said, doesn't want children, actually, I feel like that also, reading that chapter as well, you could really feel that longing in the character, and it just shows like, your skill as a writer as well, and really be able to put your mind into the head of a character who's actually just very different from you as well. And so to hear that your editor's son also read the book and had such an impact. And speaking of lily pads, I would also like to ask a bit about the prominent featuring of plants and flowers in the book, as you can see from the cover here. The cover designer called you a cover designer's writer.
Oh.
And
thank you, Stephen Breda.
And I know that you are also a very proud plant parent as well, and I really enjoy seeing the progress of your plants on Instagram. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this prominent featuring plant of your plants in your novel, and also what the symbolism that holds as well.
Oh, this is such a lovely question. So like many people during COVID, I kind of like became obsessed with houseplants. And my husband is allergic to a lot of things like cats, dogs, etc. So we can't have pets, but we can have plants. And he loves plants, and he has a green thumb. I don't really. Everything that you see on my Instagram, he is responsible for. Yeah. So I love houseplants. And in the book, I think mostly it was the like when I was reading writing the part that's set in South Africa, like the first part. So I had to do a little bit of, I hate doing research, but I had to do a little bit of research into Cape Town because I've never been there, and part of it is set in Cape Town because because there's a long story behind that. But I had to set that part of the book in Cape Town, and then I read up on Cape Town, and apparently like it has like a great many number of microclimates like within that one place. And also like there were these lists of plants that grew there, and I have like many friends who are from Cape Town for some reason, for a country that I've never been to. And whenever they post photos, they're like all these the jacandra, like the purple flowers. It's incredible. It looks science fiction. And so in my mind, South Africa is like this like really beautiful, like I had to have all of the foliage, all of the plants. And then I had the scientist Mali Bongwe. She's like staring out into the canopy, and like she knows the names of all of the scientific names of all of the trees that grow there. And I got those like from a Wikipedia entry because it was talking about how all of these plants grow together in one place, nowhere else in the world except there. And I found that so fascinating, that diversity. So I wanted that biodiversity metaphor to be in this utopian space, because humanity falls because they lose that diversity, because they get into cloning. And so, and the richest way visually, I feel, to show diversity is plants, because they're far more diverse than animals, I think. And so, yeah, so I ended up with a lot of plants. There's like a interstellar arc that has like all of these plants inside it, and like, yeah, I didn't realize it until you asked this question that there are a lot of plants in here.
That's really interesting how it's kind of happened almost subconsciously, even though there are plants all over the cover as well. So clearly other people are seeing that symbolism quite strongly, including the cover designer. And I think that concept of biodiversity, and in your novel, how humanity fails because they lose that diversity, I think is really interesting. And also reminds me of that was like a someone who I follow on Instagram who basically gives tips on how to live in a more eco-friendly way. And one of the videos that he did said, is if there's someone around you who has no interest in, protecting the planet or anything like that, the best thing you can do is give them a house plant. And that will that's the one way that you can very easily convert someone who's not interested in these issues. And I think that's, especially as someone who's also very fond of houseplants, and you can see that, interest in your novel and the message of protecting the planet and the dangers of losing that diversity.
Yeah, we have this monstera plant, and we got it during. I didn't know about monstera plants until COVID, and then we got this monstera plant, and like it doesn't realize it lives in an apartment because it just keeps getting like bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm like, you do realize that there's a ceiling and walls. Like you can't get any bigger. It's like turning into the second husband because it's in the bedroom. I don't know how we're gonna move it. Like if we ever have to move out of the apartment. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
I was just thinking about my monstera plant.
I also have one, and it just does not stop growing. It's in a really tiny plot, and it just keeps growing more leaves. And I'm like, where do they come from? Where is it getting its energy? But it keeps going. It's quite amazing. I mean, we're talking about biodiversity, and one of the things that I love so much about your novel is how it's really fun and fast paced, but at the same time, it's tackling some of these really, really important questions that are affecting us now. And while having this kind of lightheartedness, it's also very serious and very, it never takes any of these subject matters lightly. And I think it's very effective in that sense. And novel is asking so many of these big questions, and I, for one, found myself I'm still thinking about a lot of the questions that have been raised. I mean, one of these questions is what makes us human, which is a huge one, right? There's one quote in Yonghun's chapter, for example, that says, "Planet means beloved in Thai, a reminder that it is not cells or nanites or subroutines that make us human, but whether we love or are beloved." And I was wondering actually whether in the process of writing the novel, did it help you come any closer to finding the answers to some of these questions, particularly like what makes us human?
Yeah, it's definitely like it's a fundamental truth that I believe in, that humanity is not so much spontaneously generated from the fact that we are born, although that should be the case. But so much of what we call humanity comes from other people and people helping people and giving each other humanity. And the real tragedies that happen with the human race, for example, murder, genocide, those are things that happen because we do not acknowledge the humanity of other people. Like we do not give the humanity to other people, like we withhold it from them. So if you are a person, you are actually very, very powerful because you have the ability to turn someone into a human or a non-human. And some people really get off on that power and become sadistic murderers, etc. And so since this is such a fundamental belief that I have, it had to color everything that, especially there's always like this like AI or robot in science fiction that's like learning about like what humans are. And that's what humanity is to me. And that's what it has to learn. Like in the beginning, when it's an AI, like there's only one person in the entire world that really acknowledges them as human. And then as they make their way through the world, and part of why they want children is because if you have a child, like this child has no choice but to acknowledge your humanity. And he wants, by the time it's a he wants to love someone because that's what humans do, and he wants to give humanity to someone else because that would also make him more human, like, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I was like working out those ideas as I wrote, I think, and then it really solidified in this sense. Like, for example, like when you're married, quite a lot of like at some point in your marriage, of course you love the person and like, you know, and all of that. But it's also, it kind of like shades into ideology at some points. It's like, you know that you love this person. You don't just love this person. Like, you know you love this person. And at some point, it's like, is there a difference between knowing that you love someone and loving someone, like in the essential romantic way, like from your heart? I mean, I do love him romantically, of course. I wrote this entire book based on him, but like, but at some point, like, you really have to like. It really does become an ideology, and it's like really interesting to see like how your behavior is like. But that's also an example of, you know, it's when two people loving each other, they really have to make a commitment, and they really have to kind of like, they kind of enter into this almost mass hysteria of two, or this ideology of two, like a Marxism of two, where they're kind of like, yeah, bound by something that's not just like, oh, these like romantic feelings that spring from me because of whatever, but because it's like something that's kind of like goes beyond you, that happens to manifest in this other person that is in the room with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love the Marxism of two and ideology of of love as an ideology. And it sounds like as well, it was a quote earlier in the novel where it says, I write in order to think. And it seems like actually through the writing process, you've solidified those kind of ideas that were maybe more abstract in your head, and those, you know, that your understanding of love as well. I'm conscious of time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I like no offense to Wittgenstein, but I think it is really, really important that people use language to think.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's very cosmetic, and it can very distract you. And, you know, Wittgenstein is right, but I think it's very, very helpful for everyone to like keep a journal, especially by hand. Especially if you're a fast typer. Like, the faster typer you are, the less conducive it is for typing to help with your thinking. And many of you are fast typers because you're of a generation where you've never known a world without personal computers, for example. So like, yeah, get a notebook and a pen. And like, you know, I just want to encourage more people to write by hand more. And also, like you said at the beginning, to be bored more. Because the poet Susan Stewart said that, like, oh, boredom is so generative. Like, things just come to you from the ethers. Let the aliens speak to you. You never know what they're going to say. It's uncomfortable at first because you're not used to it, because we're so used to, as Claire says, like overstimulation. But I think it's also very, very illuminating when you kind of like sit and stare at a blank wall for a bit and just see what your subconscious pushes up to your conscious. You may be very, very surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much also for touching on that idea about writing by hand, because that was a question I had earlier, but I've got so many questions I had to skip over, unfortunately, because we don't have enough time. But the power of writing by hand and how that's different from typing, and the importance of using language to think. I think that's really profound, and I think it's also so true. And actually, sometimes having words or terminology for something that was just abstract in your mind can just help you to understand that concept more. Sometimes it can be limiting, but also it can be very freeing too. I think you also answered the second to last question that I was going to ask you, which is basically about how the book, it's talking about these very important issues, but also these very difficult. It's a hauntingly plausible darkness to the book, which really calls the world out for the terribleness of the world for what it is. And it really reminded me of you as a person, someone who will always speak out about these issues, but will also at the same time, you're never defeatist. There's always a hopeful message, I think, in whenever you speak about these things, and I think that's always really struck me about you, and it also struck me about the novel. For me, it's a very profoundly hopeful novel too, as well as dealing with these very difficult issues. Just to finish off before we go on to Q&A, I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to get through everything, but I'm conscious that I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for you to all ask your questions to Anton. I'd love to ask you about your upcoming work. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience eager to know whether there may be another novel in the horizon soon. And also could you share also your upcoming translations too? I know you mentioned about Blood of Kings already, but if there's anything else you'd like to highlight, we'd love to know.
Oh, sure. The next thing to be released is Blood of the Old Kings by Sung-il Kim. It's going to come out in Orbit. I Want to Die, but I Still Want to Eat Tteokbokki is out now.
On sale?
Yeah, over there. Okay. Yeah, it's the sequel. I wonder if they have the sprayed edges edition because it's Waterstone, so they may have the sprayed edges edition. And I collect royalties on that one, so it would be nice if you bought a copy. It's a bit darker than the first one, and so I asked for a trigger warning to be put in the book, and then Bloomsbury was like, "Oh, okay, we can kind of like embed a trigger warning-ish paragraph like in the end paper," and I was like, "Okay, that sounds good." And then not the Evening Standard, what's that stupid newspaper? Sunday Times gave like this weird ass review about like, oh, like I guess trigger warnings didn't make it across the Pacific to Korea because like it's so blunt. And I'm like, look at the frigging, it's right there. And so I think in subsequent editions, Bloomsbury is going to like make it more prominent. It's very prominent in the US edition because yes, trigger warnings did make it across the Pacific. And I specifically asked them to put a trigger warning on this book because I thought it has to do with like suicide ideation and eating disorders. And I was like, oh, I feel like we should give like a warning to readers so that they're ready to read it. Because like the first book is more about like mild depression, like, but the second book like has self-harming, like, so I felt like I think we kind of like need to put that in. And so yeah, so I don't know what galley this Sunday Times reviewer is like. Anyway, so that's available now. Oh God, what is under embargo and what am I allowed to talk about? So because translation is like so complicated, I can talk about The Bird That Drinks Tears. Although we're not married to the title, I'm thinking like The Bird Who Drinks Tears. This is a tetralogy, 4 books, very thick, 120,000 words each, that Mato Mandersloot translated into Dutch. And I'm doing it into English, and there's going to be a German edition as well. And our edition is going to come from Harper Voyager here and in the US and in Australia. It's going to be like, Anglosphere wide. It's going to be a huge edition. This is Korea's Tolkien, basically. This is Korea's Lord of the Rings. There's like a gigantic man chicken in it. I love him. Yeah, so that's going to be really, really fun. So that's a fantasy tetralogy separate from the fantasy trilogy that I'm doing with Sung-il Kim. That's Blood of the Old Kings, and I just handed in the second part of that trilogy, and I'm going to do the third part of that trilogy. So that's 7 very large fantasy books. So I hope you like fantasy. A couple of historical books there. I think I have, someone asked me to count this yesterday, and I think I have like currently 7 books in the can that's ready to come out and contracted for 11 more or so. So a lot of books, like 20 books are going to come out over the next 3 years. And that's translation. I'm writing a Korean novel that I'm super overdue on, but I'm also translating 20 books, so they just have to eat it. I'm sorry. So I'm writing a Korean novel. I'm not translating it because I cannot translate another book. I'm hoping, maybe you'll translate it. Who knows? So there's a Korean novel that I'm writing. I think it's going to come out at the end of next year. It's about painters. And I want to write the book I want to write after that. It will be an English novel, which is going to be about, I call it Rachel Cusk in space. It's a long story. So the Rachel Cusk trilogy, I want to set that in space. I wrote about 20% of that, and then after that, I want to write a novel about Wordsworth and Coleridge if they were gay. Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that's what's upcoming.
So many incredible and fascinating titles we have to look forward to. I would also like to highlight that Anton does not recommend anyone work at this pace or this intensity.
It's a very bad idea. Yeah.
It's really incredible just how much you're doing, and yeah, thank you for all that you're doing for Korean literature as well, as your mentee. I'd like to open up the floor to questions, and also there might be some questions on, if you're tuning on online, if you have some questions, please do put them there. We hopefully can get to some of those too. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand.
Hi, Anton. So just a little bit of context. I interview Anton for my thesis on exophonic translators, because at the time he was not yet an exophonic author. He was just an exophonic translator. So in the interview, at one point I was asking about proficiency and fluency, and you said that being proficient stifles creativity. This is your first English language novel as an author. How does it, I guess I don't have a very good question to ask, but I just wanted to bring that quote from yourself and ask you how that went, how the monolingual drag of writing a novel in English as the author, how did that go with your creativity and fluency?
Oh, thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I haven't really had so many bad experiences as a translator with editors in the US and UK. I really have. I've had because for the most part, like editors are very, like when they do a translation, they realize it's a translation. And they're like, okay, it could sound a little different from, like, it doesn't have to sound like it's written, that it was written in English. They I think extreme example is Peter Blackstock in Grove Atlantic in America. And when he was editing Love in the Big City, he was like, oh yeah, let's leave in all these Korean words. Why not? Like, we know that everyone knows that it's a Korean novel and it's about Koreans, and let's leave them in. And I was like, okay, that's great. So that was really fun. With the novel, I don't know, I've just never felt like, even though I am an exophonic translator and exophonic author, this means that English is not my native language. Even though that is the case, growing up, I've never had, no one really questioned my fluency. They might question my fluency based on my race, which happens a lot, but they never question it based on the fact that I am, because they can't tell. I could be born in New Jersey for all they know by the way I sound. So they can't really tell anyway. And so it hasn't been so much of an issue. I think this also connects to the fact that so many first debut authors also talk about imposter syndrome. And I've never had imposter syndrome even as a translator, because I'm like, I'm a Korean who speaks perfect English. So why should I, what is the imposter here? So I've never had that issue so much. And it's always been for me, a fight against the perception based on my race, more so, and my nationality, more so than it has been my actual language skills. So when my editors know me, they've already gone past my race. They're like, okay, this guy. And also, I always feel like something my husband said early on in my career is who cares if it's accurate as long as it's interesting, as long as it's good. And that's how I who cares if it's not fluent or, proficient or polished or whatever, as long as it's interesting and good. I love textured writing. Bora Chung, for example, she's not considered a beautiful prose stylist, a polished prose stylist. And I love her for that, because her sentences are so horrifying and funny at the same time. No one writes like her. She's so textured. There's when you read it, you feel the roughness and you feel invigorated by that roughness. I think more writers should write like that. I think we should stop trying to be so crystal clear and polished and whatever. And that's what I meant by my comment for your PhD thesis, which is going to be a book from Bloomsbury, I believe, called Exophonic Translation. Yeah. Yeah. So a little plug there. Because I'm in that book. Am I like patient zero in that book? Anyway, I'm like the typhoid Mary of that book. Yeah, so yeah, I think as long as you, even if you're an exophonic translator or an exophonic author, as long as your language is interesting, it doesn't really matter if it's like fluent. Like you'll have editors help you with the other stuff, so don't worry about it. Yeah.
That's wonderful advice and really challenging as well to rethink what we consider to be good writing. And particularly as translators, I think a lot of people feel pressured to remove that texture and make it really smooth. And actually a challenge to keep that texture in, especially if that's what the author is intending as well in their source work.
Yeah, especially if that style, if it's their style, if it's what gives vigor to their writing is exactly that roughness. It's very difficult to tell like when you're right up against like the writing like that. But so many translations fail because they like translate out all of that and try to make it into this weird like Iowa workshop MFA voice, which is cute, but it doesn't fit everyone, right?
Exactly. Thanks so much for that question. We'll look out for your book as well. It sounds fascinating. Yeah, we've got another question just here.
Hi, thank you for an amazing talk. And my question has to do with what Lucia said, and it's about multilingualism. You write in both English and Korean, and I'm just interested in how that changes your practice. Do you feel like your identity changes with each of the languages? Just if you could talk a little bit about that.
I'm a completely different person in Korean and a completely different person in English. Like I have separate memories. I have separate, probably heart rates, blood sugar levels. Yeah, because I read some like people with, it's not called multiple personality disorder anymore. It's called dissociative disorder. She went to Oxford for psychology. That's why I'm looking at her. Not because
Long time
she,
ago now.
not because she has more than one personality. So yeah, so apparently like different personalities have different heart rates and different like everything. Like you're literally a different person when you are a different person. And I feel like that way to a large extent when I'm writing. Some people ask me like, oh, does your Korean invade your English when you were writing this book? Or when I was writing my Korean nonfiction book, No One Told Me Not to, like last year, that was published last year. And I'm like, no, because they're completely different people. Like apparently when I talk in my sleep, my husband informs me, you always talk in your sleep in Korean. Like, so I go back to this like pre-husband state where I'm like, normally it's when I'm in middle school for some reason, and I'm like dreaming about middle school and how much I hate it here, and then I'm like shouting at my teachers or whatever, like, and I'm always doing it in Korean, and it's like, so yeah, I think my English wrote this book, like my English language used me as a vessel to come through and write this book, and for my Korean book, that was also the case, and I'm writing my Korean novel now. I have no idea where it's going. Like it's about painters. I'm like, what do I know about painting? I don't know anything about painting. Stop this. But my Korean keeps insisting that no, this is what's going on. Here is a painter. Here is a painting. Like it's very annoying, and now I have to do some research. But yeah, so yeah, I feel very, very kind of like separated and divided. And when I'm translating, it feels like because I have to channel both. It feels like I am actually interpreting someone else. It's like simultaneous interpreting someone else. Like, yeah, because I used to be a simultaneous interpreter. And that's what it feels like when I'm translating. I'm like listening to myself, read it aloud, and then I'm like interpreting it into English. But it feels like they really feel like two different people.
Thank you. I think that's really interesting. It highlights the fluidity of our personalities as well, something we might think is, as someone who is a former monolingual, something I thought that was quite concrete, which is actually not. Sujong, are there any questions online as well? Wanted to make sure.
No, she had her
okay.
hand up like before. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Claire and Anton. I'm curious about when you spoke about how you have to get out of your own way. You know, when you become stuck, how do you become unstuck? How do you get out of your own way?
Yeah, great question. So BBC Sounds app. Try not to listen to music that has lyrics. Well, it doesn't. Maybe it works for you, but it doesn't work for me. Like even if it's like Italian opera and I don't understand opera, Italian, especially if it's in opera, even then I feel like it's too much. So classical, like elevator jazz, classical music, not like German romantics like Beethoven. Don't listen to that. But like very very like laid back, new agey music. That's very helpful for me. Working in cafes, like the ambient noise is very distracting, especially like loud cafes. You guys have really great pubs in England. So pubs are a really great place. I feel like you should write in pubs, no? Because like I've been like very productive in pubs whenever I visit, because like it's so noisy that I can't hear my own thoughts and my hand is free to write. Speaking of which, a really great book that describes all of this is Indeterminate Inflorescence by Lee Sung-bok. It is coming out here in the UK from Alan Lane, which is a Penguin Random House imprint in hardcover. I translated it. And part of how I wrote this book is I took the lessons from that book to use here. So Indeterminate Inflorescence is based on the lectures of Lee Sung-bok, who is a poet. And it's done in like very easy to read aphorisms. And he's like, don't, like, your brain does not write the book. Your hand writes the book. Like, stop, like, stop invading your hand. Like, write the book first. And then, well, he says poetry. Write the poems first, and then you can edit it with your brain. Like, don't think about it when you're writing, just write. But too often we do the opposite. Like we think too much when we're writing and then we don't think about it after writing it. It's like, no, don't do that. Do the opposite. And like he has all of these like really great like images. Like if you like a word, like words are like, they have mouths and tails, and the mouth is like biting onto the tail of the next word. And so you have to be very gentle when you take like the creatures like out of your brain, because like if you force it or if you think about it too much, like the mouths like go over the tails. So you have to be very gentle about like doing it. So, but once you take one out, it all like comes out, like it all starts coming out like in a series. And you have to visualize your writing, not as something that you are creating or whatever, but you have to visualize yourself as like a vessel, as like this channel where water is flowing through, and you have to let the water flow through you. And yeah, and I feel like the danger of this is that it kind of like the book doesn't encourage alcoholism, but like alcoholism, like that's why so many writers are alcoholics. They want to disable their executive functions so that they don't get in their own way of their own writing. And so don't do that. There are many other ways of doing that. Some people like meditation, some people, yeah, but for me, it's been noisy cafes, like ambient cafes. Seoul is great for cafes. I don't like to work at home because then too many distractions. And yeah, and co-working spaces are really nice too, although they're kind of expensive, but I think there's some affordable ones. And yeah, BBC Sounds app.
Yeah, write first, then edit with your brain is the takeaway, I think. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. Talking about this book.
Oh wow, you have a copy.
Yes.
Yes, that's the US edition.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah.
It's really amazing. I have actually a question indeed about how you select your translation work. Because I actually don't know when I first started noticing your name, but then when I did, I looked at my bookshelf and there were many of your books. But part of it was also I'm an army, BTS, RM, and the whole book. And then I realized this book, but then also some of the more political books, like also really dark, like The Underground Village. I'm reading it now and I'm like, wow, this is bleak. And then also the Topoki book. So I don't think it's I don't want to make it sound like a trivial question, but I am fascinated by the range of works that you decide to translate, and I would be inspired by knowing how you go about selecting what you want to work on. Obviously, you work a lot, but like how do you choose? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is not a trivial question at all. It is the question. So because choosing what book to translate is probably the most important decision in the entire translation process. And you have to be very careful with your resources because translating an entire book takes a very long time. and it's a lot of work, and so you don't want to it's like a marriage, like you don't want to commit to someone who you have lukewarm feelings for. It has to be something that you really viscerally respond to, and also you have to be the right person for the book. Like Welcome to Hyunamdong Bookstore, like that bestseller right now, like that came to me first, and then I was like, this is a really nice book, but I feel like Shanna is just so much better for it. And so, okay, here you go. Buy book. So yeah, initially I would select books based on the fact that I can hear it in English. Like immediately I could get the voice. But now I'm kind of like, oh, I like to challenge myself. It's a bit masochistic. And I was like, oh, I actually, I really like this book, but I don't know how it's going to sound in English. So I'm going to try to translate it. It's very perverse. But I always learn more from challenging myself like that than I do from something where I immediately hear what the voice is supposed to be. Also, I think the danger of doing only works that you know how to do, you kind of like get stuck in a rut. And also it limits you because there's so many other, such a diversity of books, as you said, such a diversity of books that I want to do. Like, I don't care if it's something that's nonfiction or poetry or genre is just marketing. Genre is like gender. It's just marketing. It doesn't really mean anything intrinsically. As long as you vibe with the book somehow, then that's a sign that you will be able to find a way to translate it. So I think the most important thing is that I really feel passionate about the book as an object, and I just figure out the rest. Yeah, this is where Claire's backwards working methodology works. It's like, oh, I really like this book. I don't know how to publish nonfiction. How do I do that? I look at other people who've published nonfiction. I go to them and ask them questions. I ask for their proposals and blah, 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 blah. Like, so you just like work strategically. But the most important core has to be there, which is you love the book.
Thank you so much for that question. We've got there's one online. Great, thank you.
So it's a question from Dorian Peter. How does it work on several projects at the same time, from translating different voices to writing your own characters all at the same time? How do you even manage not to mix them up?
Yeah, no, this is a very, very, like, Meryl Streep has the same problem where if she does a character who has a too similar accent to another one, like if she plays a Danish character and then plays a Swedish character and the accents are too similar, like she says that's really difficult to like switch. And so I don't translate books at the same time. When I'm doing the first draft, the drafting, I do them serially. However, the problem happens. It's kind of a big problem where I'm now translating so many books where when they come back for edits, I'm already on the next book. But that's still easier than having to find a new voice for a manuscript. For example, from last December to this July, I translated 7 books. And that's like almost a book a month for 7 months. And the way that I survived that was, I think most of the books, except for maybe 2 or 1, were authors that I had translated previously. So like a new Bora Chung, I'm like, oh, I know how to do Bora Chung. Like another Sung Il Kim, oh, I know how to do Sung Il Kim. Like I could slip into that very easily. And so, so that's helpful in that way. When I'm editing, again, I use my ego, superego, and not my id. When I'm translating, I use my id. So if I'm translating during the day and then in the evening, I'm like looking at a manuscript and going through comments, like that's uses a very, very different part of my mind. And as for writing, I think I managed to do that by writing on the subway. Like, so I have an office. I work from home, but I have an office. And in the commute, it's about an hour, and Seoul subway is very nice and, very pleasant. And so I'm just like, I write on the subway. I cannot translate on the subway because I would have to use a laptop. I cannot divide the screen any smaller on a phone. Someone is going to invent that app someday, and then I could be translating on the subway, but I cannot translate on the subway because of that technical reality. And so I have to write or be on Twitter. But I have to write. So it's like actually a great time for me to be writing on the subway, because it's also distracting, like the motion and the crowds, and like that's very good for writing. Yeah, so I kind of like compartmentalize my life to like make it work. I look at like slots of time where I can work. Like I love working on airplanes and trains, and like it's a very productive place. Those are very productive places for me now that I do so much travel. I can also do a lot of work there. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. I'm not sure who was first.
That guy over there, yeah.
Hi, yes. You touched on this briefly with the typing earlier and how there's more of a reliance on technology. And I was just interested in terms of your book, the nanites are just replications of the real. So they are just part of the simulacra. And toward eternity is a singularity. There's no towards eternity, no toward eternities, there's no multiplicity. So I was interested in, alongside that, with the juxtaposition of choosing to put in romanticist poetry, such as Christina Rossetti was in there, and Emily Dickinson, who the American poet. How much do you think this is a commentary reflecting how limiting technology is becoming for human creativity, in terms of everybody is now just becoming remembrances of past selves? They're not creating. Not to say this is your opinion, but as say, how would you interpret that?
My opinion is absolutely that we are all echoes of the past. And that so many things that we consider are new are actually quite old, or new versions of an old thing. And because for me, so I specialize in 19th century British poetry, and that's why there's so much of it in here. Although, as you say, Emily Dickinson is American. The reason why there's so much of that in here is because when I was reading all of that in my grad school, I was like, wow, like Emily Dickinson sounds so science fiction. Like some of her poems like builds an entire science fiction-y world like in 4 stanzas. And so I wanted to show that and showcase that like in this book. Like I want to have that reading, that metaphysical, but what if the metaphysical was actually physical? Like, so and that's why there's so many motifs repeat throughout the book, because I love that and because I think life is like that. The city, like London itself, I mean, there's so many juxtapositions between like the past and the future. You have like the glass of the shard, and yet you have the little shards in the muckracking on the shores of the Thames. And so, and I love all of that. It's such a rich complexity, and to me, that's also how, we pass on things like to the next generation. And like, I wanted to make a commentary on that. Last night at Foils, there was this question about like genetics. And so like geneticists believe that it's not just DNA that we pass on. It's also so many different epigenetic factors that we pass on to our children and to the next generation, that it's wrong to say that DNA is genes. Like when we say genes, we should include all of these different epigenetic factors. So yeah, all of that kind of like came together in this book. So while technically it's science fiction, and it's supposed to be like, I just came from a conference where I was invited to speak about the future, future tense. I feel like it talks a lot about the past and how the past can echo into the very, very, very far future. Because I think it ends like 1,000 years in the future or something. No, several thousand years in the future, because, yeah, no spoilers. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Maybe this later. Yeah. In the front row, yes.
Thank you for coming. Did you go college or university when you study author? And by the way, I really love your accent, and I really hate my accent.
I love your accent. I love your accent more than my accent. I went to Korea University College of Law, and then I was so bored that I double majored in psychology. And when I put in my application for the double major, they were like, "You are literally the first law student in the 100-year history of Korea University to request a second major." And I believe I'm the first to graduate with one too, because a few others did after me, but then none of them graduated. And after that, so I had a double barrel degree, and like everyone in Korea assumes that I was a psychology major who double majored in law. And I'm like, no, I'm a law major who double majored in psychology. And I make that distinction because I had to take like 30 more credits. It was like not a good decision. And then I started a degree at the Open University of Korea, where I studied French literature. And then I finished it in the middle of my MA in Victorian poetry at Seoul National University. So I have 4 college degrees. Yeah. So on my website, on my author page at RCW, it says that he is an enthusiastic, if somewhat mediocre student, because I do love learning, I do love school, but I'm just not I'm not like an academic. I'm not like, academic genius or anything. Like I'm just not that at all. And so yeah, that was my schooling. What was the other question? Mhm. No, in writing. No. I have an LLB, which is a bachelor's in law, and then I have a BA in psychology. I have a BA in French language and literature, and then I have a master's degree in English literature. And so the English literature part was I had to go back for my master's because I really, really needed that education. Because while it's all great to just like spontaneously write, like just write, let your hand write, at some point your brain does have to kind of like edit and recognize what you've just written and manage to like, oh, you actually mean this, and like arrange it for you. And well, my psychology degree taught me that. But yeah, so it was very useful for me to identify like, oh, what I'm trying to say when I say this, and then tweak it so that I say what I'm trying to say. And that's where an education is like really, really helpful. But it's going to be different for everyone. Some people need like the creative writing degree more because they are already like really good at that which I was not good at. But they want like, connections, or they want just like an environment where writing is taken seriously because maybe they grew up in an environment where it was not taken seriously. So for them, maybe like an MFA, or I think here it's an MA in creative writing, like that might make more sense. So you really have to like think carefully about what do I need. I also like, there's so many workshops now that you don't really need a degree program per se. I'm in several workshops. I'm in a workshop with Claire. I'm in another workshop, a multilingual workshop, and I teach workshops, not just for writing, but for translation. And like, yeah, and I'm constantly trying to improve my practice and constantly showing people my work so that they hold me accountable. And then they also like see things that I can't see about my work and troubleshoot, and like, yeah. So it's a constant process, and degrees are very, very helpful, but I don't think it's ever going to be enough to just have a degree. Yeah.
Thank you. Any advice for people to get an author?
Well, it takes longer. Like for me and for most people, it takes longer than people think. So you kind of have to go at it for a long time and try to get your manuscript as polished as possible before you're sending it out to agents. And then be very open to edits. Yeah, writing is a solitary process. You can do it alone. Publishing is not solitary. Publishing is collaborative. So you have to keep an open mind.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to be moving on to the book signing. I just wanted to say a big thanks to Anton and for
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone.